Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. Just yesterday on the channel, I had perched when we talked about a couple of things that manga are doing that the big two could really utilize and elevate their profile and really get in the game as far as competition. Today, I want to talk about some of the lessons that DC and Marvel can learn from crowdfunders. Obviously, Kickstarter, Indiegogo are doing very well. The profits are going up, and a lot of people are churning there as an alternative. And I think a lot of that has to do with the marketing and the way that they're actually able to go out there and reach fans and retain their fans being a big important part of that. And here with me to talk about that is my good friend Tim Lim, the artist behind Common America, Black Hops, and other projects. How you doing, Tim?
I'm wonderful. It's a beautiful day here in the USA, and I'm hoping that you're having a wonderful evening over there in the Philippines, Wes.
Oh, we are having a wonderful evening. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because what we've seen with Black Hops and Common America both is that you guys have developed steady growth. So you're maintaining your audience, but you're also growing it a long time. We don't really see that in comic books, and we don't even always see that in crowdfunding. There are certain crowdfunders, it feels like they plateau or they even dip as far as people coming back to kind of go and support the sequel project, whatever. And you guys are consistently growing. So obviously you have a good idea how to go out there and gain new audiences, gain new readers, and then keep the ones that you already have. And that's really important. Like there is one thing that DC is doing that you guys are doing. And I think DC is doing it wrong and compared to what you're doing. You are going to Webtoon. DC's got this, what is it? The Wayne Family Adventures.
Right. It's like a slice of life.
Yeah, and you guys have Common America. And the difference is if somebody went to Webtoon and they read Wayne Family Adventures and they decided to go to DC Comics and find the comic book that's like that, there isn't one book that they're publishing that is similar to that. Whereas if they went into your Common America Webtoon and they went over to read your comic book, it's the same characters.
Yeah, it's that continuity that matters in the delivery of the actual product itself. And in the case of what they're doing with Webtoons, which I think is really smart and it is a very entertaining strip that you can read there, you're right. There is that kind of disconnect between what you get there versus what you're going to get in anything that's actually in the printed format from anything that's in continuity in Batman currently. And so a lot of times they'll just, go back to sticking to Webtoon. I think the same thing could be said for, let's say, Teen Titans, right? Regardless of what you or me or anyone might think of the cartoon, like Teen Titans Go, the nature of that cartoon is entertaining enough, but it doesn't necessarily transition into any type of Teen Titans comics media.
Because, well, they had a Teen Titans Go comic book up until about 9 months ago.
Right, yeah. But you said but that's relatively recent compared to however long the show had been running. And so what ends up happening is that you end up feeling like you've been bait and switched. Like you get promised one thing and then you get something else that isn't quite like it. Now, I remember when you and I were growing up and superhero movies were very rare, but when they were out, it was like a tentpole event. I remember distinctly that when Batman Returns came out, I mean, heck, there was a slew of Batman related material, and it was a pretty good time for Batman stuff. I know you had Chuck Dixon on your show recently, but I mean, from the time Batman Returns came out, even through the slew of kind of bad movies like Batman and Robin, you still had a lot of very good classic Batman stories that had come out during that time period, a lot of them written by Chuck himself. And so a lot of times they match. Everything was very cohesive in terms of what you saw from another medium versus what you got on the stands. I would actually argue that a lot of times what you got on the stands was sometimes better, obviously. Like, for example, Batman Forever, regardless of the nostalgia effect, some people like the movie, they remember it fondly. But when you went to your comic shop or when you went to your newsstand to pick up any Batman-related comic, a lot of times it was better. And so you got a better deal than you got from the other medium that you used to check it out. And part of that is because in our case, for Common America, the Webtoon is written, drawn, and created by the original creators, which is Mark Pellegrini and myself. And so if you like that flavor, you go and you get our omnibus, our trade, or get it digitally through Amazon, and you're going to get the same thing. Like it's essentially they're very complementary in terms of how they interact with each other.
Absolutely. I think that's kind of an oversight. I think what they're doing is smart, but there's nowhere for someone to go from that free webtoon, which is essentially marketing or advertising, to go actually go get a paid product. I think that's not very. It's a bit of an oversight on DC's part. What I also notice about within DC, Marvel, the big two, is there's a disconnect between a lot of the creators and the actual customers. It almost feels like there might be some resentment. Well, there's some resentment on both sides between the two, depending on the creator and some of the things that have been saying that everything gets inflamed. Whereas in crowdfunding, it seems like the lifeblood of a crowdfunding campaign is not only a good product, but it's maintaining that relationship and that trust that you have with your customer to actually keep them coming back. There are a lot of tools that crowdfunders use. A lot of them will try to get established on YouTube as a means to really get the word out. You could use social media. I know you have different platforms you guys are using, but DC and Marvel really need to get on the ball, not only on how to use social media, but to really reconnect with their customers and let them know that they care.
Yeah, and that's a precarious position to be in, because one thing that you want to do, obviously, it's a rule of thumb, is you want to have good customer service. But what does that entail? Obviously, there are things that are positive experiences. You want to be optimistic. At the worst, you want to be kind of dispassionate and just give answers that answer typical questions. So, for example, when someone says, "When is the book going to ship?" I mean, it doesn't hurt to just say, "We're estimating sometime between November and December. Thanks." I think that suffices. You don't have to use flowery language. You don't have to be overtly verbose. It can be a copy and paste response, and I think that's fine. And I think that it's a harmless thing that you can do. And obviously, if you want to put the cherry on top, then you can say something a little bit more personalized and something a little bit more descriptive. But I think the problem too, the line that people have to walk when you're in the creative space, is you also don't want the customer to feel like they have complete access to you. And this is something that over time we've noticed with Common America, which is this idea of a customer might reach out to us for a question, and it might be something that is a detail that we don't want to reveal. So, for example, we've had some customers who say, "Hey, I'm just wondering, when will Volume 5 come out?" And we'll say, "Well, it'll come out sometime between January and March of next year." But we think that answers the question, but then they follow up and they'll say, "Oh, I love what you guys have done so far. Tell me something. Am I correct about this one character?" And then maybe we answer it, maybe not. And then they'll follow up with another question where it's like, "Okay, now I think that what you need to do for Volume 6 is you need to incorporate this character, and their name will be this." Now you're in this position of, okay, we've crossed that threshold of customer service, and we're entering a territory where it's like, we just thought it was an unspoken rule where you're not granted that much access. And so what do you do at that point? In our case, a lot of times we just disengage, where it's like, well, we're just not going to answer that because that's a little bit too close to what we're comfortable in answering. And the customer in response, they either get mad or they say like, "Hey, they never responded to my question on," they'll go on social media and say, "They never answered me. I think that's rude." And then how do you respond to that? So it does become this kind of snowball effect. Now, no matter what happens, the reaction that creators and customer service reps should have is you should just always do what you can to not negatively say anything. So don't cuss out the customer. Don't be rude to them. That's the bare minimum of what you do. And it is like a minefield that you have to maneuver. But having
you have to say, like, "Listen, we've got a ton of surprises in Volume 5, and I don't want to spoil any of them."
Right, exactly.
You're just going to have to wait for it.
Yes, there's that. And not just that, but for example, now we get a lot of script requests. So people they'll just mail us ideas, right? And so we have a form response. And this is true. For people listening who do conventions, you're going to get this a lot. You're going to have people who will just spout off like ideas that they have. And we just tell them, we appreciate the passion that you have, but we cannot take unsolicited ideas or opinions or plots that we did not ask for on our own, and that's to protect you and us. Because what if your idea is very similar to something that we have? Now you've put yourself and us in this position where it's like, what am I going to say? What a coincidence! Like, hey, our next issue is going to be that exact same thing. And we always tell people that it might sound like kind of a jerk thing that we're doing, but it's something that is pretty standard in industry, which is why a lot of times you'll see Marvel, DC, and Image say, do not do this unsolicited because we can't accept it. We will just throw it away. And they do that for legal reasons. So there are ways of maneuvering that sphere, and I get it, having been on this side and the other side as well, that having that access to the creator is a good thing, but it has to be limited, and there has to be a fine line in that interaction. But you want to, as much as possible, tailor it to the customer experience, while on the same time retaining your own privacy and ability to divulge things and answer things at your own discretion.
And when you don't want it to be adversarial, because once you get to that point, you're basically kind of turning people off, and you're turning readers away, not even based on the product that you're putting out there, but just because of the relationship that you develop. So you definitely want to keep, you want to be open, you want to be transparent, but you also want to have that professional boundary. Like, okay, now we're getting too close. But I do think a lot of the crowdfunders realize that those relationships are so important, so they're always cultivating them. Where it feels like a lot of DC or Marvel creators are maybe more disconnected. So there's got to be a happy medium to where you're pleasing fans. You're going out there and you're doing the best you can to go out and sell the product without just kind of turning people off.
Right, and attached to that too. Something else I want to mention in terms of things that can be learned. One thing that we have seen as being very beneficial, and Doug Ernst put it best. I honestly didn't. It's not a made-up word. It's just the term that he uses to apply to it. Is in crowdfunding, momentum is everything, and so momentum is that idea of you are moving forward. Things are at a breakneck speed. And the irony about it is that in crowdfunding, it's not. I mean, like for comics, for example, you have an ongoing series. You're getting something every month. And so you have something to look forward to. That's the expectation. In crowdfunding, your average campaign is going to probably be a minimum of 30 days. And then you ask yourself, okay, what is the soonest a book can come out? We actually have it down to kind of a science because we time our books to coincide with when we got our funding. So for example, typical Common America campaign is 30 days. At the end of 30 days, it's standard for Kickstarter to not deliver your funds to you until 14 days after. So we actually know the very day that we're going to receive our funding. You add about 3 or 4 business days on top of that to clear the bank, and then you're good to go. You already have the net deposit from the crowdfunding campaign. So you actually know approximately when you can actually start delivering. Now, that's a managing of expectations. So you let people know, okay, between the time you guys start and the time you guys finish.
I mean, DC and Marvel don't have problem getting their products out on time, except, I mean, there's that paper shortage right now, but there's always product coming out. I don't think they don't have issues really meeting deadlines, do they?
They don't, but where I'm talking about the momentum is that's the least of their worries is meeting those deadlines. The momentum part comes in what do you do in interim periods. So for example, for us, we commission a lot of art. Like we have the webtoon up. That way it's always kind of in the public eye. And this kind of ties into what you were saying about the utilization of other mediums so that things match. It's already been said between guys like you and Perch, but it's like, why doesn't like your movie tie into your book in a way that makes sense, like logical sense? Why are the two like kind of disconnected? And I think that it's one thing to meet your deadlines. That's good. I mean, the big 2 and the big 3, actually every major comic publisher does not have a problem with that. It's that you have to generate the interest and the momentum outside of it. You've already taken care of the time aspect of it, but making sure that people are hyped about it is something else. And I think
that's the thing that you're talking about. That's absolutely correct. Is like when you're with the event schedule that they have,
right?
There's no ability to generate any momentum.
There isn't. And
by the time the next event starts, you might still be in the last event.
And not just
let alone finished with it.
sometimes they do things to halt their own momentum, so they just step on their own feet. And you guys have talked about this ad nauseum, you and Doc, but it's like the Hickman run. I mean, that is the closest thing I've seen in the last 4 years to genuine momentum, where people are hyped. There are people coming into stores for the first time in years because they heard, hey, I heard that this Hickman run on X-Men is really good. And for a while there, for a couple of months, that's all that you guys would talk about, where it's like, my gosh, like they really have their pace going. And then they just fell on their face. Like they just halted their own momentum by doing things that did not propel it forward. And now it's like stumbling. I listened to you guys talk about these X-Men titles, and they're so disconnected, where it's like, wait a minute, how did this happen? Like, why is Mystique able to do this? Like, how in the world is Hope Summers able to do that when it was contradicted in here? So this is one of those things where it's like, yeah, you have a monthly book coming out, but you've crashed your own momentum by not being consistent in it. And it's like, no, like everything.
You make the reader stop and go, nah, that can't happen.
Right. And in crowdfunding, you can't afford that, because for us, for example, our growth has been very good and very steady. You can actually measure it over time. Between Common America 3, Black Ops, X Common America, and Common America 4, we grew our readership by 1,200, which is, it's great. That's an astronomical number for crowdfunding. But in the grand scheme of things, we're still looking at under 4,000 total backers. So that means that we have to hold on to every single one of them and make sure that every time we put something out, they feel like the train is going and it's still moving along and we're not tripping over ourselves.
Yeah, it's crazy. And one of the things that those positive relationships and, the kind of that trust you build, there are a lot of crowdfunding campaigns that don't fulfill on time. That hasn't been an issue with you or some of the other iconic comic guys, but that issue is out there. If you have that strong relationship with your fans, you get some forgiveness. You get some like built-in forgiveness kind of there. But if it's adversarial, you kind of lose all of that. And I think that's like one of those things that they could really use, is some goodwill, kind of from their fans. There's another thing out there is with the marketing. Obviously, if you're doing a crowdfunding campaign, you can have a YouTube channel, you've got social media out there, but you don't have access to all the news websites that can go out and publish whatever your press release is. You can't really get access to some of these bigger sites that can get the word out for you. So you have to be a lot more creative. And it feels like, with what you guys are doing, with what I've seen with other crowdfunding campaigns, as far as the marketing, it's much more clever, a lot more thinking outside the box. Now, you and Mark, you don't necessarily have bigger YouTube channels. Like Doug has a pretty big YouTube channel that he's able to use. And, obviously he's going to help leverage and get the word out with you guys because you're friends or whatnot. But you can't really count on that to really get the word out. So you guys are going like, hey, we know people like these characters and like kick-ass art. Let's go find the coolest artist you've never heard of and let them draw our character and really get it out there. And I think that's really worked out for you guys.
Yeah, in order to compete with some of the other people in the crowdfunding sphere, we've had to do basic kind of business 101 decisions to be competitive with them. For example, we offer one of the lowest prices in that crowdfunding market. You get a 64, 72 page hardcover book for $10. It's like, it's really hard for people to point to someone else and say, hey, can you beat that as far as the price is concerned? But to their credit, I think Marvel and DC have done things like that in the past. But again, it's kind of one of those things where they step over themselves. So for example, whenever you would have event titles, they would like have perks attached to it. I remember like when I was a kid, there were times I would go into the store and it was like, now I know some of this was retailer specific, but I know a lot of it was not, where it was actually a tie-in with the title itself. I remember like there was like a Spider-Man comic that came out and you got like a trading card with it. And I was like, oh, what's this? And it's like, oh, it's a promo item that comes with the purchase of the Spider-Man book. And I could tell that it was like a Marvel promo. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like you reward us like that. I think the closest thing that happened was like when they had the marriage of Batman and Catwoman, I think they had an event planned out like that where it's like, hey, show up to your retail shop and
they had little wedding invitations.
And that's cool from a marketing perspective, but then they tripped over themselves by not spoiling the whole thing. And so they're aware of these tactics that they can use from a marketing angle, but it's like they can't help themselves. It's like they're so focused on the subversion of expectations, whereas us, we try to live up to the expectations. By the time of this recording, Common America 4 has come out, and what we're happy about I don't mean to brag, this is just the truth. On social media and our messages, we have 100% positive rate. There's not a single person who said I was disappointed in this book. Most people are saying like, this made me cry. This was the payoff. This was the greatest conclusion to a first story arc I've seen in recent years from an independent title. I can't believe you guys did it. And that makes us feel good because it means that we didn't waste our time, and that a lot of the stuff that they did invest in, a lot of the merchandise and stuff, they're going to get something that they're proud of. So I think that that's just a lesson. It's like, well, Marvel and DC guys can be like, well, we did the same thing with our Batman Catwoman thing. How's that any different? It's like, well, people didn't like your product, so you did all the marketing.
A lot of what they do is they're like, well, we need to get mainstream exposure. So right. let's do something that will get us, a CNN interview. Obviously, a lot more people are going to see that or see this, but that doesn't penetrate geek culture so much, and that doesn't get people hyped up for the product. Where DC, I guess their marketing budgets are small, but certainly bigger than what you guys have. Where you can't afford any mistakes. You have to know exactly who your customers are, who your potential customers are that are going to enjoy your book, and really go hit them hard. Whereas you got DC and Marvel, they're just spraying and praying. Well, it's so unfocused.
I'll give you a very good anecdotal example. So this was some years ago. It was the character Silk. When they announced her, it was like, oh, Silk, for the first time, it's going to be an Asian spider power based female lead character, right? So in the comic sphere, it's like you have this kind of infighting, different opinions, yada, yada, yada. But I was having Thanksgiving dinner, and I have a niece. Now, my niece, she and I are very different politically. We'll just put it that way. She's a Harvard grad. She comes from a different mind space. And so we were just eating, and she was like, hey, you heard about that new character in comics? I know you like comics, Uncle Tim. And I was like, oh, where'd you hear that from? She said, oh, CNN. And she's like, I'm just so happy. I'm so proud. There's finally going to be a female spider-themed character. And I asked her, I said, that's cool. Are you going to check it out? She's like, nah, I don't read comics. And so I said, that's funny. That's ironic. And I always think about that anytime I hear these stories of, oh my gosh, breaking news, MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, yada, 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 about this new character. I'm like, you have the budget. You were able to pull strings and get that mainstream exposure. But I don't think you're going to get the audience that you want, even if you're catering to that. It's kind of like me. It's like, I'm a Catholic. So let's say I'm watching Fox News or CNN, and it's like, oh, breaking news, like Catholic monks create their own cigar. Like it's made in a monastery. I'm just like, that's cool. Don't smoke. So it doesn't really cater to me, regardless of how it might try to pander to a specific part of my identity.
So you get the support, but you don't get the reward of the actual customer.
Exactly. And I think that's where that's where they're putting their eggs in kind of a basket that's not going to pay off. I've always thought, and you and Perch have mentioned this, and other people, I've always thought it would be smart if in the movie theater for your ads, why not just pay for the ad space where it's like, did you like the movie? Check out your local comic book shop. We have these different things in there, right? It's like,
it would be smart for Marvel, DC, even Diamond to go out and reach out to local comic shops and say, listen, we'll go halvesies. Right. You want to go put up an advertisement for your comic shop when there's a big superhero movie out. Obviously, throw that comic specifically up there and tell them where it is. We'll go halvesies on it and see if we can generate some business.
Do you remember when we were growing up? I don't know if you. So I thought it was a local thing, and then one time I was in Myrtle Beach on vacation, and I saw the same commercial, and I thought, what? But I think it was DC. They had put out this TV ad. And they gave it for like retailers to put out, and it was like had these flying images of the characters, and then it had like Lobo at the very end. It was like an animated Lobo mouth where it's like, these aren't your parents' comics, kid, or something like that. And it was an ad for comic book retailers to put out there.
They produced it and funded it, but you have to pay for the airtime.
Right. And it was great. I remember, I think we saw that on our local news for about a whole year or two. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. And back then with DC, I don't think it's not quite the juggernaut as it is now. So there is a marketing budget there for things to actually cross promote. I just don't know why they don't do it. And I think part of the reason why is because they feel like the comics are an IP mill and a forwarding service for the larger things.
Comics are marketing themselves. Why are we spending marketing budget on marketing?
Right. And it's like, nah, you want to you want to cross promote, because if you feel confident in both, you're gonna have people watch the movies, they go read the comic, and if the
Keep
comics are
them
good
busy in the
IP
meantime
mill,
for the next movie.
right? It's chicken and egg. It's like the movie forwards you to the
That's
comic,
where
the comic gives you
your
the IP
webtoon
stuff
is
for the
really
next
smart.
thing.
You're waiting
Yes.
for the next issue or the next volume of Common America. Go check out the webtoon. It comes out weekly.
Right. And not just that, but we also do it because it's a younger demographic. Typically, webtoon skews anywhere between, I think it's mid-teens to adults, and we want that because prior to that, Common America was skewing like late 20s to people in their 40s, and then now we've pushed it down to where we're like at 18. I know that it's a hard sell for maybe kids, because I think at the most you're looking at like young teens as far as like what I think it'll be suitable for. But I like the fact that we're able to kind of cut our demographic down to get to younger people.
Tim, I do want to say thank you very much. Just kind of talking about some of the things that you've learned, some of the things that you've seen in practice within comic book crowdfunding that the big two could learn from. And sometimes you look at what other people are doing in other spheres. It might not be direct competition, but they're certainly doing something. They're trying to attract the same customers. And if they're being more effective, you need to learn. And I do want to say thank you very much for joining me talking about this. Do you have any last words for the viewers?
No, I think that right now the independent creator sphere is, I think, where you're going to see a lot of innovation. So make sure that you give us and other creators a shot. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised with some of the things that we're doing that we feel like is helping us grow for sure. We've seen that objectively. And I think that this is where a lot of the excitement is. So sometimes you have to look outside of the big two and outside of the proverbial box to see where people can innovate, or at least use time and true traditions in business to try and succeed on their own.
Thank you very much, Tim. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wes.